Yeah, all good. All good. Good morning. It's a beautiful early spring morning here. Not a cloud in the sky. Absolutely beautiful. Been for a couple of laps and doing a bit of reflecting on some of the things I learned going from a street forge footballer, so to speak, someone who's playing in the park and that they're playing for a team, 11v11. So I sort of played just street forge football until about 18, 19. I was playing some five-a-side with my mates and in the park and having a kick about here and there. And I played for the odd local team up until that point. But up until then, I had a couple of mates who sort of, said, and just play in the park when you go have a crack at the state league. And I thought, you know what, I'll give it a go. And, I got on and and it was a big learning experience for me. And the things I learned, so looking back on it now, and I'm not here to give any advice or suggestions, just anecdotal. So if I sort of think back, because it took a long time to adjust to playing in a 11v11, sort of think back in life, some things I sort of learned where, the challenges are when you're playing in the park or five-a-side with your mates type thing, and don't get me wrong, with some really, really fantastic players, some of which you played in the state leagues as well. So especially the sort of park football, absolutely. So they had a lot of ability. But still, all things said and done, you're playing in the park, for hours on end and that sort of stuff really. You don't have any sort of rules in the way you have in a team environment, 11v11. You can roam free, you get out there and you play, and you don't have the discipline that you have and the tactical understanding of playing 11v11. Also physically, the conditioning is completely different to pace yourself for a 90-minute game. And so, you go from sort of running free and roaming free, playing with your mates, and there's no offside, and your movement, and it's all about you on the ball and beating a player, and you don't have the tracking back of an opponent, so to speak. You don't have the same work rate off the ball, at least for the most part. So in view of that, when you go to a team environment, all of a sudden, especially when you've got this 11v11 situation, it's a whole different ball game, 11v11. You're playing 11v11, all of a sudden you've got to sort of adjust. You've got to have tactical awareness and discipline, and also physically. So I reckon, looking back on it, I would say for me, some really key things for me and key learnings for me is sort of learn the game. Speak to coaches and learn your position. Learn positional awareness. That's a big thing. And what really helped me in the end around that was I did some coaching. I enrolled in some coaching courses. And because I'd never had any sort of proper coaching up to a point, that really helped me. When I went on the old prelim. I did it a couple of times, the old prelim in England. I went on it in 96, and that was really, really helpful to sort of get coaches. And if you learn to coach somebody else, then you kind of learn yourself. So, and I'm not advising it on a coaching course, but, understand the position, or understand the positions, understand things like technical stuff like scanning, the technique, striking a ball, passing, because all of a sudden you've got different passing range. You go from short, sharp passing to all of a sudden you're out there, you got hitting diagonals, and your positional awareness. You go from sort of running around everywhere to all of a sudden you're sort of managing your movement. Being aware of what is required tactically in the game. So that's a big thing for me. A big learning experience for me is sort of learning that, if that sort of, makes any sense to you. So, learning that. So that's the big thing. The other thing is sort of the fitness side of things, what I would do, going back. And I did actually get a track coach to help me physically. And this was over at Narrabeen. is Sydney originally. So I got myself a track coach originally to help out a little bit with the running and that sort of stuff. So I had a track coach. I go to Narrabeen. He was a good track coach. And that's how I sort of got interested in athletics as well, to be fair. So he'd help me polish up the running. And I felt that was really instrumental to help and, get me head round, the conditioning side of things. And then in England in '96, I had a conditioning coach I was working closely with, Chris Butler, his name is, and he was the conditioning coach. He had a stable of athletes, but he also was the conditioning coach at the time of Wigan Rugby League. And I'd go and train with him, and occasionally he'd sort of take me. Occasionally, he'd let me join in the weights room with the rugby league players, and we'd go to Rivington Moors once or twice in the pre-season with the rugby league players, and that was a big thing. But for the most part, I would work with him and his stable of athletes, or me and him alone, and I felt that was really useful for me, really useful. So I think for me, the one thing I would have done on top of that is done some fitness testing. So when I would end up working in performance coaching roles at clubs, that's why I was big on fitness testing, finding out some normative data of where you need to be, and sort of like, building a profile. That's the sort of key point. And I learned that when I started working as a personal trainer at a place called Lifeline Health and Fitness in '97 to '99. And the guy who would run that, his name was Dave Richardson. He was the fitness coach of Crystal Palace at the time. And I'd also signed up for a modular course. It was called Sports Performance Conditioning, just a modular course. We'd go up every other month or so to Loughborough Uni. And that was really helpful too, the education side of things. So, and that's sort of, you kind of navigating your way around. And I think for me, the big takeaways for me, speak to coaches, really get your head around the tactical side of 11v11, understand your position thoroughly, because that's one of the challenges, like understanding your position, that spatial awareness and that sort of stuff. What's important, these aren't any sort of chronological order of importance, just generally the three big things. The fitness test, and compare them like normative data to get your head around where you are, where you need to be. And finally, play as much 11v11 as you can. That's where you really learn. Play the 11v11, because you're coming from sort of the street forward football where you're playing like your 2v2s and 5v5s, or sometimes it could be 2 versus 5 or whatever really. Then obviously it's not always easy translating that into 11v11. So for me, when we played smaller sided games, if I was on trial for a team or playing for a team, I felt a lot more sort of comfortable, and I looked a completely different player than playing 11v11, because it takes a bit of time to adjust and learn, particularly if you're sort of like, going into the game later on in life, so to speak. But, I sort of took these learnings and they were invaluable for me moving forward in sort of performance coaching roles I've had in football. But that's my take on it. You might see it differently. It's always good to sort of share ideas, but that's the way I sort of see it from my experience. So yeah, the three big things for me is sort of definitely, understanding your role, understanding that sort of tactical awareness, the physical side, that sort of normative data to see where you are comparatively to, where you need to be for the level you're playing at or you want to play at, and obviously playing 11v11. And that sort of gives you a bit of a blueprint for a map to sort of move forward. But that's my take on it. I'm not here to get any advice or make any suggestions. That's just the way I see it. It's always good to hear other input.